A single grain of desert sand holds entire economic histories within its microscopic form. This is not mere dirt, it is a time capsule, preserving the financial secrets of civilizations that vanished beneath the dunes. Modern science now deciphers these tiny clues to rebuild the bustling markets and far-reaching trade routes of legendary places like Petra, Palmyra, and the ancient cities of the Indus Valley. By the end of this journey, you will understand how to read the hidden ledgers of the earth itself. We will uncover what caused these powerful economies to flourish and then mysteriously collapse. What forgotten wisdom might these silent sands hold for our own world today? Standing on the surface, a desert appears as a monument to emptiness, a sea of silent sand. But the truth lies in the smallest details. This ancient dust is not a simple substance. It is a finely layered archive, a complex mixture of countless tiny stories waiting to be read. Blowing on the wind are the remnants of entire ecosystems and economies. Grains of pollen from long-vanished fields tell us what crops were cultivated and when. Microscopic layers of ash act like timestamps for catastrophic fires or the constant smelting of metals. The shattered remains of insects and tiny fragments of pottery and metal speak to daily life, to manufacturing, and to trade. To understand an ancient city, you must first learn the language of the earth it was built upon. By deciphering this fundamental composition, we transform barren ground into a filled ledger of human activity. The next question is how we learn to read it. The tools to read this earthly ledger are as precise as the clues are small. Think of an archaeologist not with a shovel and brush, but with a diamond-bladed saw. They carefully remove a solid block of earth, a perfect core sample of history, and take it to a laboratory. There, it is transformed into a glass-thin slice, a translucent window into the past. This is the science of geoarchaeology, the study of how natural processes create the archaeological sites we find today. Under a powerful microscope, the true story of that soil block is revealed. This technique, called soil micromorphology, lets scientists examine the intricate layers and tiny inclusions within the earth. It is like reading the rings of a tree, but for an entire civilization. A single slide can show a sequence of occupation, a story told in sediment. One distinct layer might be rich with decomposed plant matter and ancient manure, evidence of fertile farmland. Directly above it, you might see a sharp line of crushed limestone and plaster dust, the unmistakable signature of new construction. This tells a clear economic story, a shift from agriculture to urban expansion. Was the city growing so prosperous it was paving over its own fields? The soil holds the answer. It can also reveal moments of crisis, a sudden layer of sterile sand hinting at a devastating drought, or a band of silt from a catastrophic flood that wiped out a season's crops. These environmental events were direct hits to the economic heart of a city. By reading the soil story, we move from guessing to knowing, understanding the very ground upon which ancient markets were built. But the mineral world is only half the story. The same dust that preserves layers of earth also holds the fragile, biological echoes of the people who lived there. These biological echoes are often captured in the form of ancient pollen, a microscopic witness to the world above. A scientist peers through a microscope at a slide prepared from a core sample, focusing on pollen grains preserved for thousands of years. This is the science of Palynology, the study of ancient pollen and spores. Each tiny, durable grain is a data point, a direct message from a long-dead landscape. Finding a high concentration of cereal pollen from plants like wheat or barley tells us that fields of grain once swayed nearby. A strong presence of olive tree pollen points to extensive olive groves, the foundation of a lucrative oil trade. This biological data connects directly to the agricultural engine that powered a city's economy, revealing which crops were cultivated not just for local survival but for export and profit. We can even track the rise and fall of specific industries. A sudden spike in cotton pollen, for instance, could signal a booming textile trade, but the pollen record also holds warnings. A sharp decline in tree pollen from forests, followed by a rise in pollen from hardy weeds, paints a clear picture of deforestation. The city was likely expanding its farmland to feed a growing population, or perhaps cutting timber for construction and fuel. This overexploitation of the land, driven by economic demand, could strip the soil of its fertility, leaving it vulnerable to the very desert that would eventually reclaim it. The dust tells the story of the choices a civilization made to feed its people and fuel its growth, choices that ultimately shaped its destiny. And just as pollen reveals the agricultural economy, the dust also holds the gritty residue of ancient workshops and factories. These durable plant skeletons are the third key to the dusty archive. While pollen tells us what was flowering in the wind, phytoliths tell us what was firmly rooted in the ground or being processed in a workshop. These are microscopic pieces of pure silica, a kind of glass that form inside the cells of living plants. When the plant dies and decays, these tiny, indestructible skeletons remain, holding their distinctive shapes for millennia. A grass phytolith looks completely different from a palm tree phytolith, and a domesticated wheat phytolith can be distinguished from its wild ancestor. This specificity is what makes them so powerful. Imagine excavating an ancient kitchen floor. You might find no visible traces of food, but a soil sample under the microscope could reveal a scattering of phytoliths from millet, rice, and dates, a silent menu from a meal eaten thousands of years ago. But their real economic power is revealed in the unexpected. Finding a dense concentration of rice phytoliths in the heart of an ancient Egyptian city, far from any possible rice paddy, is not a mystery. It is a receipt. It is direct physical evidence of long-distance trade, proof that this city had the economic reach to import exotic foods. Even more subtly, the shift in phytolith shapes, from the complex forms of wild grains to the simpler ones of domesticated strains, maps the very moment a society transitioned from hunting and gathering to farming. This was the original economic revolution, and its fingerprint is preserved in the dust. With this complete picture of the agricultural landscape, from field to trading house, we can now move to the workshops where raw materials were transformed into wealth. The cracks in an ancient floor are a library of forgotten labor. While pollen and phytoliths tell the story of the fields, the story of the workshop is written in even smaller text. This is the world of micro-debris and residue analysis, where we read the invisible evidence of ancient jobs. Imagine the tiny fragments that would have been swept away or trampled into the ground, a constant rain of dust from daily work. A bronze worker's floor would be sprinkled with almost invisible flecks of copper and tin. A stone bead maker's space would hold microscopic chips of carnelian or lapis lazuli. By vacuuming a precise grid of an ancient room and sifting the collected dust under a microscope, archaeologists can map out economic activity with stunning clarity. They can identify the exact corner where metal was hammered, or the spot where precious stones were shaped for trade. This transforms an empty space into a bustling workshop, its ghostly imprint preserved in particles smaller than a grain of salt. This technique connects an abstract economic concept, like local production, to the tangible, dusty reality of a single artisan's daily toil. the story becomes even more intimate when we look at the very containers people used. A broken piece of pottery, a simple sherd, might look empty and clean to our eyes, but trapped within its microscopic pores are the chemical ghosts of what it once held. This is residue analysis. Scientists can wash a potsherd with solvents to extract and identify ancient organic compounds. Finding traces of tartaric acid is a clear marker of wine. Detecting lipids from olive oil reveals a container for a valuable trading commodity. In one striking example, jars from ancient Mesopotamian sites were found to contain traces of bitumen, a natural tar. This was not a local resource for many cities, so its presence in these containers is a shipping label. It proves a thriving, long-distance trade in waterproofing material, essential for sealing the hulls of ships and the walls of baths. These invisible residues are the ultimate evidence of commerce, the literal fingerprints of goods that passed from hand to hand across vast deserts and seas. Together, micro-debris and residues move our investigation from the general environment to the specific, moment-to-moment behaviors of an ancient economy. We are no longer just studying a city, we are observing a metalworker at their bench, or a merchant sealing an amphora of wine for a long journey. These microscopic clues act as direct, undeniable proof of production, consumption, and commerce. They answer the most fundamental questions: what was made here, what was eaten and drunk here, what was bought and sold. This is how we rebuild the economic pulse of a lost world, one microscopic speck at a time. And once we understand that pulse, we can finally confront the silence that followed. The story of an ancient economy is not only found in royal decrees or grand marketplaces, but also in the quiet dust of a family home. By mapping the microscopic debris across the floor of a single dwelling, archaeologists can reconstruct its economic blueprint. The space where food was prepared might hold a dense scatter of tiny fish bones and minute fragments of seashell, suggesting a family whose livelihood was tied to the sea, either as fishers or as traders in salted fish. In another corner, a high concentration of microscopic fibers and the distinctive polish left on stone tools from weaving could reveal a household engaged in domestic cloth production, spinning and weaving not just for themselves but for the local market. The quality and variety of these materials speak volumes. A home with residues of imported spices in its cooking pots, or with microflakes of a semi-precious stone like lapis lazuli in its workshop area, was clearly connected to far-reaching trade networks. This was a wealthy household, its prosperity etched into the very particles trampled underfoot. This intimate view reveals a fundamental truth: the grand, city-wide economy was not a separate entity. It was the sum of countless small stories, a vast network built from the daily labors of individual families, each contributing their own specialized craft or trade to the whole. And just as these households fueled the city's commerce, their collective output flowed into the public spaces that formed its industrial and administrative core. The air in these ancient industrial quarters would have been thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of hammers. This was the economic engine of the city, a place where raw materials were transformed into wealth, and the dust that settled here tells that story with remarkable clarity. When archaeologists analyze the soil from these zones, they find it saturated with the gritty, metallic residue of industry. Tiny, glassy blobs of metal slag, the waste product from smelting, are everywhere. There are also countless fragments of misformed glass, the mistakes from a glassblower's workshop, and minute particles of fired clay from countless pottery kilns. This is not just dirt, it is the accumulated fallout of mass production. By meticulously mapping the concentration of these micro-residues, a detailed picture of the city's industrial layout emerges. One city block might be dominated by copper slag, indicating a district dedicated to bronze working, producing everything from tools to ceremonial vessels. Just a few streets away, the soil might be rich with iron particles, pointing to a separate quarter for blacksmiths forging stronger, more durable weapons and plows. This clear geographical separation is profoundly significant. It means the economy was not a haphazard collection of generalists. It was a complex, organized system with a sophisticated division of labor. This level of craft specialization is a powerful indicator of an advanced economy. It proves that the city was productive enough that not everyone had to farm. It could support entire classes of full-time, specialized artisans who did nothing but smelt metal, blow glass, or throw pots. These skilled workers produced a surplus of high-quality goods, far more than the city itself needed. This surplus was the very foundation of trade, the tangible product that would be loaded onto camels and ships to be exchanged for the wealth of distant lands. The organization of these workshops, therefore, gives us the first half of a powerful equation: what the city produced; the other half of that equation, the evidence of where all those goods actually went, is found far beyond the city's workshops, out in the sands of the trade routes that connected this bustling economy to the wider world. That single grain of foreign sand is a silent traveler, a tiny piece of evidence for a vast and interconnected world. When we find materials in the dust of a city that could never have originated there, we are looking at the physical proof of commerce. It is like finding a coin from a faraway country in your own pocket change, a small but certain sign of a connection. Take obsidian, that volcanic glass prized by ancient peoples for its sharp, hard edges. A tiny chip of it found in the ruins of a Mesopotamian city might seem insignificant, but under scientific analysis, the unique chemical signature of that obsidian can be traced back to a single quarry in Anatolia, hundreds of miles away. That one microscopic fragment is not just a piece of stone, it is a map. It charts a journey across mountains and deserts, passed from hand to hand in a complex chain of exchange that linked distant cultures. The same is true for the most precious of commodities. In the dust of an Egyptian workshop, scientists have identified microscopic particles of lapis lazuli, that deep blue stone flecked with gold. The only known source for the finest lapis in the ancient world was a single set of mines in modern-day Afghanistan. For that mineral to end up as blue pigment on a palace wall in Egypt, it had to traverse thousands of miles, a journey that would have involved countless merchants, sailors, and caravan drivers. Even more perishable goods leave their mark. The discovery of black peppercorns, or more commonly, their microscopic residues in the soil of a Roman port city, tells an incredible story. Pepper is native to India. Its presence in the West is a receipt for a trade route that spanned the entire Indian Ocean, a monumental undertaking driven by economic demand. These exotic fragments, these imported whispers in the dust, completely reshape our understanding. They prove that these so-called lost cities were not isolated outposts. They were vibrant, cosmopolitan hubs, nodes in a surprisingly globalized ancient economy. They were places where the wealth of the world flowed in and out, all documented in the microscopic ledger of the earth. This evidence of such sophisticated exchange raises a compelling new question. How did these complex economies, with their long-distance trade and specialized workshops, keep track of it all? How did they manage the accounts for an entire civilization? The most dramatic chapters in this dusty archive are not written in the language of commerce, but in the silent testimony of a changing sky. You can trace the moment a thriving economy began to suffocate. Deep within a core sample taken from what was once the outskirts of a great city, a scientist finds a stark transition. For centuries, the soil layers are dark and rich, packed with the phytoliths of domesticated grains and the pollen of flowering fruit trees. Then, with terrifying clarity, that fertile band ends. It is abruptly sealed beneath a thick, sterile layer of fine, wind-blown sand. This is not the story of a sudden invasion or a single catastrophic fire. This is the record of a slow, inexorable death by drought. The land that once fed thousands could no longer support even a single family. Isotopic analysis of the dust particles themselves adds a chilling precision to this narrative. By measuring the specific forms of oxygen and hydrogen atoms trapped within ancient clay particles, scientists can calculate historical rainfall patterns. A shift in these isotopes reveals not just a bad season, but a decades-long megadrought, a period where the rain simply failed, year after year after year. The economic impact was immediate and catastrophic. Think of the specialized workshops we just explored. The bronze smith could no longer trade his wares for food when the farms produced nothing. The weaver had no one to sell cloth to when the population was starving. The long-distance trade routes, the lifeblood of the city's wealth, withered as caravans found nothing of value to collect and no prosperous market at the other end of their journey. The entire complex economic machine, from the grandest merchant to the household artisan, was built upon a foundation of agricultural surplus. When that foundation turned to dust, the entire structure crumbled from the ground up. The city did not fall in a day. It was gradually abandoned, its people scattering in search of water and life, leaving their homes to be buried by the very sands their failing economy could no longer hold back. This environmental detective work reveals a profound and unsettling truth. The fate of the most brilliant human economies is inextricably tied to the delicate balance of their natural world. The dust from these lost cities holds up a mirror to our own time, asking us to consider the fragility of the systems we depend on today. The ruins of Palmyra rise from the desert like a line of stone vertebrae, the skeleton of a city that was once the heart of the world. This was no ordinary settlement. It was a toll gate on the windswept highway between empires. Every caravan traveling between the wealth of Rome and the mysteries of Persia, India, and China had to pass through its gates, and with every camel that entered, a tax was paid. The dust of Palmyra is not filled with the industrial residue of workshops, but with the glittering fallout of pure commerce. In the soil of its ancient marketplaces, scientists have found the microscopic ghosts of that trade, tiny, indestructible traces of the luxuries that made its merchants kings. There are exotic pollen grains from spices like black pepper and cinnamon, plants that could never grow in the Syrian desert. There are mineral residues from blocks of frankincense and myrrh, precious resins burned in temples and homes across the Roman world. Most telling of all are the microscopic fragments of silk, fibers so fine and rare they had traveled thousands of miles from China. This was an economy built not on making things, but on moving them, a city that grew rich by simply standing in the right place and charging a fee for the privilege of passage. To support this bustling population of traders, tax collectors, and servants, the city performed a miracle of hydrological engineering in the middle of the desert. The pollen record here tells a story of human ingenuity, not just natural bounty. Alongside the expected pollen from hardy desert plants, core samples reveal significant amounts of pollen from date palms, olive trees, and even ornamental garden flowers. This lush greenery did not survive by chance. It was sustained by a vast and sophisticated network of underground canals, known as qanats, and cisterns that captured every precious drop of seasonal rainwater. The city's wealth was poured directly into this life support system, creating an artificial oasis that could feed its people and dazzle its visitors with shaded gardens and public baths. This managed landscape was the foundation of its economic model. A thirsty caravan would not stop at a barren rock, but it would gladly pause at a city with fresh water, secure warehouses, and comfortable lodgings. The gardens of Palmyra were not a luxury, they were a critical piece of business infrastructure, an advertisement of stability and comfort in a harsh land. Even the very stones of its grand colonnaded street, once lined with hundreds of statues, whisper of distant origins. The micro-debris vacuumed from between the paving stones is a mineralogical map of the ancient world. Tiny, colorful shards of glass point to imports from the workshops of Roman Syria and Egypt. Minute flakes of carnelian, a deep red gemstone, can be traced to sources in India. There are even specks of pearl and tortoiseshell, materials that could only have come from coastal trade with the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf. This glittering dust reveals a city that was the ultimate middleman, a place where the entire known world converged. Its economy was a spectacular success, but it carried a profound and fatal weakness. Palmyra's wealth was entirely dependent on the continued flow of goods along those specific desert routes. When political winds shifted, when new treaties were signed or new maritime routes around Arabia became safer, the caravans simply stopped coming, the taxes dried up. The gardens, deprived of the wealth needed to maintain their complex water systems, withered under the sun. The city's incredible prosperity, so vividly recorded in its dust, was ultimately as fleeting as the shadow of a passing cloud. The grid-like streets of Mohenjo-Daro were a marvel of ancient planning, a silent testament to a society built on order. Here, the dust tells a different story from the merchant kings of Palmyra, a story not of glittering luxury but of remarkable communal stability. When we analyze the sediments that filled its meticulously laid brick drains, we find the economic blueprint for one of the world's first great cities. The phytoliths and pollen preserved in this ancient sludge are overwhelmingly from wheat and barley. This was not a diversified cash crop economy, but a powerful, centralized system built on reliable staples. These grains were the fuel for a vast urban population, and their success depended on a technological marvel, a network of canals and irrigation channels that tamed the unpredictable waters of the Indus River. The very dust in the streets points to a society that mastered its environment to feed its people, an achievement that required immense collective effort and organization. This sense of organization extends from the fields directly into the workshops. The micro-debris recovered from the city's industrial quarters reveals an economy of astonishing standardization. In one district, the soil is filled with microscopic, perfectly identical chips of carnelian and steatite, the waste from workshops producing millions of beads. In another, the dust holds tiny, uniform droplets of copper slag, and the microscopic spores from pottery wheels turning out thousands of nearly identical clay vessels. This was not the work of individual artisans, each with their own style. This was mass production on an industrial scale, centuries before the assembly line. Such uniformity strongly suggests a high degree of craft organization, perhaps even direct state control. The economy was geared towards producing vast quantities of reliable, standardized goods, likely for both local use and for trade along the river networks. What is most striking, however, is what the dust does not contain. In the ruins of nearly every other contemporary civilization, archaeologists find the microscopic glitter of elite extravagance, the fine stone dust from carved palace walls, the gold leaf flecks from royal tombs, the residues of exotic foods and perfumes confined to an upper class. At Mohenjo-Daro, this evidence is conspicuously absent. There are no grand palaces, and the micro-residues from different city blocks show a surprising similarity in diet and material goods. Instead, the most impressive material found in the dust is fired brick and a substance called bitumen, a natural tar used to waterproof the city's extensive bathhouses and its sophisticated city-wide drainage system. The economic priority here was clearly not on enriching a tiny elite, but on investing in public health and communal infrastructure. The wealth of the city was literally poured into its foundations, into sewers and baths that served all its citizens. This carefully balanced system, however, was vulnerable to the very river that gave it life. Deep in the sediment cores taken from the city's lower levels, the story of its decline is written in a language of mud. The clean, organized layers of street dust and household waste are suddenly interrupted by thick, sterile deposits of fine silt. These are the calling cards of catastrophic floods, events where the Indus River overflowed its banks with such force that it dumped layers of mud over the entire city. One such flood might have been recoverable, but the geological record shows this happened repeatedly. Each deluge would have clogged the intricate irrigation canals, the lifeblood of the agricultural economy, drowning the wheat and barley fields in salt and silt. A city that thrived on precise order could not withstand such chaos. The economic foundation, so dependent on that single, managed river, was washed away. The people were eventually forced to abandon their perfectly planned streets, leaving the dust of their egalitarian experiment to be buried by the mud of a river they could no longer control. Hidden within a narrow canyon, the city of Petra appears as if conjured from the stone itself. Its monumental facades, carved directly into the rose-red cliffs, are a testament to human ambition in a landscape of extreme scarcity. Yet the true genius of the Nabateans is not etched in these grand monuments, but preserved in the very dust at their feet. This was a civilization that did not merely survive the desert, it commanded it. The soil in the heart of the city, right beside its most important tombs and temples, tells a surprising story. Core samples reveal thick, dark, artificially enriched earth, a stark contrast to the surrounding barren ground. Mixed within this soil are the phytoliths of date palms and grapevines, and the pollen of fragrant flowers. This is the literal ground truth for ancient historical accounts that described Petra as a city of lush gardens and shaded promenades. The Nabateans were hydrological wizards. They engineered an intricate network of dams, cisterns, and channels that captured every drop of scarce rainwater, channeling it through the city to sustain this manufactured paradise. This was more than just beautification. In the heart of the desert, a reliable water supply was the ultimate economic advantage. It allowed Petra to become a lush, welcoming oasis for the endless caravans traveling the incense routes, a place where weary traders could rest, resupply, and most importantly, pay taxes on their valuable goods. The city's wealth was not just built on stone, but on its mastery of water. And that wealth, in turn, funded a thriving industrial base whose ghostly imprint is found in the city's gritty residue. The dust from Petra's urban center is rich with the microscopic evidence of skilled craft. Tiny, glassy spherules of iron and copper slag are scattered everywhere, the fallout from forges that produced tools, weapons, and the metal fittings for caravan saddles. The soil is also packed with minute, misshapen fragments of pottery, the waste from vast ceramic workshops. These were not just making simple cooking pots. They were producing the distinctively thin, painted Nabatean fine ware, a luxury ceramic that was itself a prized trade item. This micro-debris reveals an economy that was far more complex than a simple toll station. Petra was a production powerhouse, adding value to the raw materials that passed through its gates and creating its own desirable exports. But the most telling clue to its economic engine is found in a substance as black as the desert night. The dust of Petra holds countless microscopic particles of bitumen, a natural tar that seeps from the depths of the Dead Sea. For the Nabateans, this sticky, waterproof substance was black gold. They held a near monopoly on its supply and trade. Bitumen was the ancient world's ultimate sealant. Egyptian mortuary priests used it in the mummification process. Shipbuilders along the Nile and the Euphrates caulked their vessels with it to make them watertight. It was used to line irrigation canals and waterproof the roofs of wealthy homes. Finding this specific material so far inland in such abundance is the smoking gun for a massive, state-controlled export industry. The economic story of Petra is one of brilliant synthesis. They combined their hydrological ingenuity to create an oasis, their strategic location to control trade routes, and their industrial capacity to produce goods, all capped by their monopoly on a critical raw material. This created a resilient, multifaceted economy that flourished for centuries, but its greatest strength also contained the seed of its decline. Petra's prosperity was tethered to the land-based caravan routes for frankincense, myrrh, and bitumen. When the Roman Empire increasingly shifted trade to maritime routes, sailing directly from India to Egyptian ports like Berenice, the caravans slowly dwindled. The taxes faded, the wealth needed to maintain the miraculous water systems and bustling workshops gradually ebbed away. The gardens withered, the forges fell cold, and the brilliant city carved from stone was slowly reclaimed by the very silence it had once defied. The true pulse of a city's economy beat in the swirling dust of its marketplace. This was not a quiet, orderly place, but a vibrant chaos of voices, smells, and constant motion, where the grand systems of trade met the daily needs of the common person. The ground underfoot in these spaces became a dense archive of commerce, a concentrated mix of everything that was bought, sold, and bartered. When scientists take a soil sample from the center of an ancient market square, they are collecting a frozen moment of this bustling activity. The sample is a microcosm of the city's entire economic life. Under the microscope, the story comes alive. Tiny, iridescent fragments of beetle wing cases might be found alongside microscopic grains of exotic spices like cumin or saffron, precious commodities that traveled vast distances. Minute slivers of animal bone reveal the cuts of meat that were most popular, while the phytoliths from different grains show which cereals were staples and which were luxury imports. But the most telling clues are often the smallest and most worn. In societies that used coinage, the dust holds countless tiny, battered fragments of metal money. These are not whole coins, but the slivers that were shaved off through millions of hands and countless transactions. The extreme wear on these fragments is a direct measure of economic velocity. A heavily worn coin fragment speaks of an economy in constant motion, where money changed hands so frequently it literally wore itself away. This microscopic evidence tells us that the marketplace was a monetized engine, a place where currency was not just present but was actively driving the exchange of goods on a massive scale. In societies that did not use coins, the evidence for regulated trade is just as clear, written in the form of standardized weights. Made of stone or bronze, these small, precisely measured cubes and spheres were the essential tools of fair trade. They were used to weigh out silver ingots, measure quantities of grain, or portion out valuable spices. It was inevitable that some of these weights would be lost, dropped in the fray, and trampled into the earth. Finding these tiny, standardized objects in the market dust is like finding the official seal of an economic system. Their presence proves that commerce was not a chaotic free-for-all, but a regulated activity, overseen by an authority that guaranteed consistency and built trust between buyer and seller. The very existence of these weights points to a sophisticated understanding of value, a system where goods could be reliably measured against a common standard. By reading this layered evidence, we move beyond abstract concepts of trade and understand the marketplace as a living, breathing organism. We can almost hear the clatter of weights on a bronze scale, smell the mingled scents of spices and livestock, and feel the press of the crowd. This was where the city's economic theories were tested and proven every single day in the hands of its people. And from this vibrant center of daily commerce, we can look outward to the very edge of the city, where the final, most poignant chapters of its story were written in the dust of its abandonment. The boundary between city and farm was often a porous line, not a solid wall. Within the very dust of urban streets, we find the unmistakable imprint of agriculture, a ghostly map of the fields and pastures that sustained the city from within. Phytoliths and pollen act as our guides to this lost landscape. A high concentration of cereal pollen from wheat or barley discovered inside the city walls is a powerful clue. It suggests that farming was not confined to a distant countryside, but was woven directly into the urban fabric. Families likely tended small plots beside their homes, and communities maintained larger gardens in open spaces, creating a green belt integrated with the stone and brick. This was not just about scenery, it was a critical economic and survival strategy, reducing the city's total reliance on food transported from afar. The evidence becomes even more direct with the discovery of dung spherulites. These are microscopic spherical crystals that form in the guts of grazing animals like cattle, sheep, and goats, and they pass through, remaining intact in their manure. Finding a scatter of these tiny crystals in the dust of a city square is like finding the shadow of the herd itself. It tells us that livestock were not kept miles away, but were corralled within the urban space, providing a daily supply of milk, a ready source of meat, and animals for traction, like pulling carts or turning millstones. This intimate coexistence of daily life and food production paints a picture of a deeply self-sufficient urban economy. The ancient city was not an isolated consumer, separate from its hinterland. It was an active, integrated producer, intimately tied to its immediate environment. This model offered incredible resilience, buffering the city against disruptions in long-distance trade or failed harvests in more distant fields. Yet this very strength, this tight coupling of the urban and the agricultural, also created a profound vulnerability, a delicate balance that could be shattered when the environment itself began to change. The true measure of a desert city's genius is written not in its monuments, but in its water. That intricate web of canals, cisterns, and dams was the city's economic circulatory system, and the dust that settled within it holds a precise record of its health. When an archaeologist carefully scrapes a sample of sediment from the bottom of an ancient reservoir, they are reading a chronicle of decisions, priorities, and ultimately, survival. A clean, well-defined layer of fine clay might indicate a long period of stable, careful management, where the water was kept clear and the system functioned perfectly. But a thick, sudden deposit of coarse silt tells a different story entirely. This is the residue of a catastrophic flood, an event that likely choked the canals with debris and required a massive, costly communal effort to repair. The very texture of this sediment reveals the economic shocks the city had to endure. Chemical analysis of these waterlogged sediments adds another layer of testimony. By identifying trace metals and other residues, scientists can detect ancient industrial pollution. Finding a concentration of copper particles in the sediment of a canal that fed agricultural fields presents a stark choice. The city's metalworkers, vital to its trade, were likely dumping their waste upstream. This is a clear sign of competition for a limited resource, a tension between the need for clean water to grow food and the economic drive to produce goods. The distribution of these pollutants maps out the city's economic priorities. Did the cleanest water go to the residential quarters, while a more polluted branch was directed to the workshops and tanneries? The dust in the pipes holds the answer, revealing a sophisticated, if sometimes strained, system of resource allocation. A well-maintained water system was the bedrock of all other economic activity. It allowed for the agricultural surplus that freed people to become specialized artisans. It provided the clean water necessary for dense urban populations. It powered the mills for grinding grain and the fulling vats for processing cloth. The system's robust health directly enabled the city's economic diversity and resilience. Conversely, the moment of its failure is preserved with heartbreaking clarity in the archaeological record. The final layers in a cistern are often not silt, but a thick cap of wind-blown sand and the crumbled rubble from its collapsing roof. This is the signature of economic collapse. The city no longer had the collective wealth, organization, or labor to maintain the miracle that gave it life. As the water vanished, so too did the farmers, the artisans, and the merchants. The management of water, so vividly documented in the sediments it left behind, was the ultimate determining factor between a thriving metropolis and a ghost city slowly buried by the desert. Behind every grand column and every traded luxury lay the relentless effort of an invisible workforce. These were the slaves, laborers, and artisans who powered the economic machine, leaving their own stories not in stone, but in the quiet, overlooked dust of their living spaces. When archaeologists shift their focus from palaces to workers' quarters, the soil tells a profoundly different story. The phytoliths and microscopic animal bones recovered from a slave dwelling paint a stark picture of daily sustenance. Instead of the varied diet found in an elite home, with evidence of imported fish and choice cuts of meat, the residue here is dominated by the husks of cheap, hardy grains like millet or barley. The near absence of tiny bone fragments speaks to a life with little access to meat, a diet designed for survival, not for pleasure. This nutritional divide, preserved in the dust, is a direct record of economic inequality, a measure of the human cost behind the city's wealth. The very bones of these individuals, when found, carry the indelible marks of their labor, marks that correlate perfectly with the dust of their workplaces. A skeleton from a worker's cemetery might show severe arthritis in the shoulders and spine, a pattern consistent with years of carrying heavy loads. On the finger bones, you might find distinctive wear patterns, a polished sheen that matches the microscopic residue of stone dust recovered from a nearby quarry. These people were quite literally shaped by their work, their bodies becoming living extensions of the industrial processes they served. They were the human machinery behind the stone blocks of the temples and the milled grain that fed the city. Yet within these harsh conditions, the dust also reveals glimpses of community and care. In the soil of a laborer's compound, palynologists sometimes find a surprising concentration of pollen from specific medicinal plants, like yarrow for treating wounds or willow, a natural source of pain-relieving salicylic acid. These plants likely did not grow there by chance. Their presence suggests that people were cultivating a form of community health care, tending small gardens of remedies to treat the sprains, cuts, and fractures that were a constant part of a life of hard labor. This evidence forces a fundamental re-evaluation of these ancient economies. We must look beyond the accounts of kings and the inventories of merchants. The true foundation of every transaction, every shipped artifact, and every architectural marvel was this vast, often unnamed workforce. Their quality of life, their health, and their daily toil were the invisible variables in the economic equation. A city that overworked and underfed its laborers was ultimately undermining the very engine of its own prosperity, building its wealth on a foundation that could, in time, crumble from within. The dust of a king's palace tells a story of opulence written in microscopic ink. In the soil of royal courtyards, spectroscopic analysis uncovers the chemical ghosts of extravagance. There are traces of sandalwood and myrrh, resins that perfumed the air of throne rooms, minute slivers of ivory, carved from the tusks of elephants from distant Africa, lie beside microscopic flakes of lapis lazuli, a blue stone hauled from the mountains of Afghanistan. In the dust of a commoner's home just a few streets away, these glittering fragments vanish entirely. The chemical signature there is simpler, dominated by the residues of basic foods, the grit from local pottery, and the pollen from common weeds. This stark division in the dirt is a direct map of the social hierarchy. The economy was not a tide that lifted all boats. It was a system designed to concentrate the finest things in the hands of a few. This concentration of wealth was not merely a social outcome, it was a powerful economic engine. The elite's insatiable appetite for luxury was the primary driver of long-distance trade. A queen's desire for pearls from the Persian Gulf set in motion a chain of merchants, sailors, and caravan drivers stretching thousands of miles. A nobleman's demand for intricately carved ebony furniture supported entire workshops of specialized woodworkers, inlay makers, and polishers. The luxury market created entire professions dedicated to the art of pleasing the wealthy, from master perfumers to gem cutters. This demand generated immense economic activity, but it also created a deeply fragile system. The entire structure was precariously balanced on the whims and fortunes of a tiny, privileged class. What happened when that demand faltered? The entire economic ecosystem could shudder to a halt. If a political shift cut off the supply of ivory, the carvers were thrown into poverty. If a war disrupted the trade routes for incense, the merchants who relied on it faced ruin. This top-heavy economy left the vast majority of the population living on an economic knife edge. The common laborer, the potter, the weaver, their livelihoods were ultimately tied to the spending power of the elite. When the palaces stopped commissioning new murals or buying imported perfumes, the economic shockwaves rippled downward, leaving the many vulnerable to decisions made by the very few. The microscopic inequality preserved in the dust was more than a record of who had nice things. It was a warning of the inherent instability that comes when an economy serves the few at the expense of the many. This fundamental tension between concentrated wealth and broad stability leads us to a final, powerful question. What happens when the system breaks and the dust finally settles over a city for the last time? The final verdict on a city's economic health is written in the diversity of its dust. When the sediment tells a story of many different industries, it reveals a resilient, adaptable economy. Think of a city where the soil is a complex mosaic. In one layer, you find the microscopic fibers from textile workshops. Just below that, tiny droplets of copper and iron slag from metalworking. Mixed throughout are the phytoliths from nearby grain fields and the mineral residues from imported pottery. This very dusty record points to a society with multiple sources of wealth. If a drought ruined the harvest one year, the city could still rely on the income from its metalworkers exporting tools. If a new trade route bypassed their port, the local textile industry could still clothe the population and produce goods for a regional market. This economic diversification created a powerful safety net. No single failure could bring the entire system down, because the city was not relying on a single pillar for support. It was a web of interconnected industries, each one able to compensate for the weakness of another. This is the dust of a city built to last. Now contrast that with the dust of a highly specialized economy. A mining town entirely dedicated to extracting a single metal like tin or copper leaves behind a very different kind of record. Its soil is homogeneous, saturated with one type of metallic ore and the uniform slag from its smelters. The Pollen record might show little evidence of local agriculture because everyone was focused on the mine. The micro-debris is dominated by one material, telling a story of a one-track economy. This city's entire existence was tied to the value of that single commodity. As long as the demand for tin remained high, the city thrived. But what happened when the vein of ore ran out, or when a cheaper source was discovered overseas? The entire economic reason for the city's existence vanished overnight. There was no agricultural base to fall back on, no other skilled industry to employ its people. The dust of such a place shows a spectacular rise, but its final layers are often a thin, sterile blanket, a sign of rapid and total abandonment. The same fragility applied to a port city that served only one trade route. Its dust might be rich with a single type of exotic import, but lacking the gritty residue of local workshops. When political winds changed and the caravans or ships stopped coming, there was nothing left. The city simply starved, its purpose erased. By reading this dusty ledger, we can grade the economic health of ancient cities. The most enduring were not necessarily the richest in gold, but the richest in options. Their diversified economic base gave them the ability to adapt, to pivot in the face of environmental disaster, political upheaval, or shifting trade patterns. They were economically agile. This ancient insight echoes powerfully today, reminding us that the true foundation of lasting prosperity is not a single brilliant success, but a robust and varied capacity to create. A thin, dark line in a soil core marks more than just a moment of fire. It is a historical turning point, a boundary between two worlds drawn in ash and shattered brick. This destruction layer, often the residue of conquest, seals the fate of one economy and writes the first chapter of another. The critical question is not just what was destroyed, but what grew from the ruins. The dust directly above this line holds the economic verdict of the new regime. In some cases, the story is one of brutal suppression. The Phytoliths and Pollen tell a grim tale. Where there was once a diverse range of local grains adapted to the regional climate, the new layers might show a sudden, overwhelming dominance of a single, imported crop. This is the signature of an imperial power imposing an economic monoculture, forcing the land to produce not for local needs, but for the tribute caravans heading back to the capital. The local economy is not just conquered, it is reprogrammed. The evidence continues in the workshops. Imagine the micro-debris from a metalworking quarter. Before the conquest, the dust is filled with the unique, local styles of arrowheads and jewelry. Afterward, that distinct signature vanishes, replaced by the standardized, microscopic slag fragments from producing the exact same spear points and armor used by the conquering army thousands of miles away. The local artisans were not wiped out, they were conscripted, their creative output suppressed and redirected to serve the military-industrial complex of their new rulers. Their economic independence was erased as surely as if their forges had been dismantled. Yet, conquest could also forcibly integrate a city into a far richer and more extensive network. A port city that once traded only with its immediate neighbors might find its dust suddenly glittering with new possibilities. After being absorbed into a vast empire, the same city's soil layers could reveal an explosion of exotic materials. There might be pepper residues from India, silk fibers from China, and glass fragments from Roman Syria, all appearing for the first time. The political shock of conquest shattered old, parochial trade barriers, violently plugging the city into a globalized economic grid. The local merchants might have lost their political autonomy, but they gained access to markets they could never have reached on their own. This dusty evidence proves that political history and economic history are not separate threads. They are the same rope tightly wound. A change in who held the sword directly dictated what was grown in the fields, what was forged in the workshops, and what goods moved along the trade routes. The fortunes of every potter, farmer, and merchant hung on the outcome of battles and the scribbling of treaties far away. This profound link between power and prosperity forces us to look beyond the palace and the battlefield to the very earth beneath our feet for the final, most enduring record of a city's life. Even the most carefully preserved dust archive can be corrupted over the centuries. The silent mixing of soil layers by burrowing rodents or the deep foundations of a later civilization can scramble the chronological sequence, blending the residue of different eras into a single, confusing sample. A single pollen grain of a domesticated plant found in a deep, ancient layer might not be a revolutionary discovery. It could simply be a contaminant that fell from the boot of a modern archaeologist or was carried down a wormhole. This constant risk of contamination means that a single data point is never trusted. Scientists must rely on a statistical approach, analyzing dozens, even hundreds of core samples from the same site to identify consistent patterns. They are not looking for a single whisper in the dust, but for a chorus of voices all telling the same story. This painstaking process of cross-referencing and verification is what separates a plausible theory from a proven fact. Perhaps the most humbling limitation is the simple decay of time. Organic materials, from woven cloth to food remains, are the most vulnerable. In all but the driest, most protected environments, they simply rot away, leaving gaps in the record. This leads to a critical principle in this field. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because no traces of silk were found in a particular market soil does not prove that silk was never sold there. The fragile fibers may have completely decomposed, or perhaps the sampling simply missed the precise spot where a merchant once spilled a bolt of the precious cloth. These gaps and uncertainties are not failures of the science, but an integral part of the story itself. They force a measured interpretation, a cautious rebuilding of the past that acknowledges its missing pieces. This rigorous, self-critical methodology is what gives the resulting economic narrative its profound credibility. It is a picture painstakingly assembled from millions of tiny, fragile, and sometimes ambiguous clues. A single microscopic clue is a fascinating whisper, but it is the chorus of all these whispers that finally lets us hear the past. The real breakthrough in this dusty detective work comes from weaving every strand of evidence together. The geologist studying soil layers does not work in isolation from the historian translating ancient shipping manifests. The palynologist identifying pollen grains shares their findings with the archaeologist excavating a marketplace. This is the power of interdisciplinary synthesis, a grand collaboration across time and scientific fields. A dense layer of olive pollen in a core sample is an interesting fact on its own. But when that data point is overlaid with the physical discovery of a massive stone olive press in the same archaeological layer, the fact transforms into a story. We are no longer just looking at evidence of olive trees. We are witnessing a thriving olive oil industry, a major economic engine for the city. Similarly, finding microscopic particles of bitumen in the dust of a workshop is compelling. Yet that evidence becomes undeniable when it is cross-referenced with a cuneiform tablet from a distant land, an ancient receipt that explicitly records a shipment of bitumen from this very city. This holistic approach acts as a system of checks and balances, preventing us from building grand theories on a single, possibly misleading piece of data. It forces the narrative to be robust, to account for every clue, from the grandest monument to the most humble speck of dirt. By fusing the microscopic with the monumental, we can move beyond simple timelines and inventories. We can begin to understand the rhythm of daily life, the seasonal pulse of planting and harvest, the clamor of the workshop, and the complex negotiations of the trading house. We see not just a city that traded, but a society whose identity was shaped by that trade. We comprehend not just a drought, but the cascading human consequences of that drought on every level of the economic system, from the farmer to the king. This synthesis is what turns a collection of data points into a living, breathing reconstruction of a lost world, allowing us to answer the most profound question of all, not just how these people lived, but why their vibrant world eventually faded back into the silent sand. The silent testimony of ancient dust is more than a history lesson. It is a survival manual written across millennia. The same principles that dictated the fate of Petra or the Indus Valley are at work in our own world today. Consider the genius of Nabatean water management, a system that turned a desert canyon into a thriving oasis. Modern cities in arid regions, from the American Southwest to the Middle East, now study these ancient techniques. They are reviving the principles of capturing every drop of rainwater, using gravity-fed channels, and storing water in underground cisterns to reduce evaporation. This is not mere archaeology. It is a direct application of ancient wisdom to solve contemporary water crises, proving that the most advanced solution is sometimes a very old one. The cautionary tales are just as direct. An ancient mining town that left behind only one type of metallic slag in its soil is a direct parallel to a modern community whose entire existence revolves around a single factory or a lone cash crop. When the mine is exhausted or the factory closes, the result is the same, a ghost town. The dusty record screams a simple truth that overspecialization is a profound economic risk. A resilient society, ancient or modern, is not built on one pillar of success, but on a diverse portfolio of skills, industries, and resources. The most chilling precedent lies in the isotopic signatures of ancient droughts, preserved in clay particles for thousands of years. These are not abstract data points, they are the birth certificates of collapse. They record the moment a stable climate pattern shifted, triggering crop failure, economic contraction, and ultimately, abandonment. This is not a prediction, it is a past reality, a documented case study of what happens when a civilization fails to adapt to a changing environment. The dust of these lost cities holds up an unavoidable mirror. By reading their long-term patterns, we are not just uncovering the past, we are stress-testing our own future. The goal is to learn from their endings to write a different, more durable ending for our own story, building economies that are as diverse, adaptable, and deeply rooted as the most enduring civilizations in the historical record. The future of this dusty detective work is already taking shape in laboratories around the world. While we can currently identify the general type of pollen or the family of a plant from its phytolith, the next leap forward lies in extracting ancient DNA directly from the sediment itself. This would not just tell us that a grain of barley was present, it could reveal the exact genetic strain of barley, allowing us to trace the migration of specific crops and the intellectual property of ancient farmers as their most successful seeds were traded across continents. We could identify the precise breed of sheep whose wool was woven into textiles or the specific species of tree that was felled to build a merchant ship. This genetic ledger would add a breathtaking new layer of resolution to our economic maps. The sourcing of raw materials is also on the verge of a revolution. Today, we can often trace a piece of pottery to a general region. Tomorrow, improved chemical analysis will act like a microscopic GPS. By creating a vast database of the unique elemental fingerprints of different clay pits, we will be able to match a potsherd found in a market in Mesopotamia to the exact quarry of its origin in the Levant. This would not just confirm trade, it would chart the specific supply chains, revealing the trusted partnerships between certain producers and distant cities, and exposing the seasonal routes of nomadic traders who supplied the raw materials for entire industries. The sheer volume of data hidden in a single soil sample is staggering, containing millions of particles. Manually sorting and identifying them is a task of immense patience. This is where machine learning enters the picture. Imagine training an artificial intelligence with thousands of reference images, teaching it to recognize the subtle differences between a fleck of copper slag and a fragment of gold leaf, or to distinguish the phytolith of domesticated wheat from its wild cousin. Once trained, such an algorithm could process in hours what would take a human researcher months, scanning and categorizing countless samples with superhuman speed and consistency. This would unlock vast statistical power, letting us see patterns and correlations across an entire city or a whole civilization that were previously invisible. As these tools become more powerful and accessible, the stories we recover will become profoundly more intimate. We will move beyond understanding a city's economy to tracing the economic life of a single city block, a single household, or even a single individual. The dust will tell us not just that a family traded in textiles, but that they specialized in dyeing wool with a specific imported purple. It will reveal the menu of a feast held in a specific courtyard and the distant origins of every spice used. These silent particles are on the verge of speaking with a clarity we never thought possible, ensuring that the hidden ledgers of the earth will have their final say. This ancient dust is anything but silent, its microscopic particles forming a dramatic chronicle of ambition, ingenuity, and the quiet whispers of collapse. Every grain of pollen from a forgotten orchard, every tiny shard of metal slag from a long cold forge, and every chemical ghost of a traded spice is a single word in a sprawling economic epic. We have traced the flow of wealth from the household workshop to the grand caravan, learning to read the ledger written not on papyrus, but in the very ground beneath our feet. This is more than a history lesson, it is a profound conversation with time itself. The choices these civilizations made, their brilliant adaptations and their fatal oversights are all preserved in this gritty archive. By listening to their stories, we gain more than an appreciation for our shared past. We collect a vital toolkit of wisdom for our own complex world. The next time you see a sunbeam illuminate a swirl of dust, pause for a moment. Consider the invisible worlds it might hold, the entire economy spinning in that golden light. If this journey into the secrets of the sand has sparked your curiosity, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join us as we continue to uncover the deepest mysteries of our past.